folks who are saying this technology is here to stay.
That's
We had
wonderful.
to
That's
go
huge.
through, yeah, we had to go through
Yeah.
this battle of existence and like the
Hmm.
right to survive. And there's still efforts to say, hey, this is a fad and we should ban it. But those are pretty few and far between now. And now it's almost that there's been this pervasive understanding it's here to stay and we're going to regulate it. Now the battles become how do we regulate it and how do we make
Hmm.
sure it doesn't stifle innovation? But that's a good place to be.
Hi, and welcome back to the What Kind of Internet Do You Want podcast. I'm Amy James, and today I am lucky to be speaking with Cody Carbone, the Chief Policy Officer at the Digital Chamber. Cody, it's so good to see you again.
Yeah, great to see you, Amy. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for making the time to talk with us. I'm excited to get this regulatory kind of update from you about this space because it's been such a big news week and quarter, and it's kind of been a wild ride lately. So we're going to get into all of that. But before we do, if you could just let people know who you are and what it is you do in Web3.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you mentioned, I'm the Chief Policy Officer at the Digital Chamber. We are a blockchain and digital asset trade association, which means we represent companies that are interested in the space in Washington in front of policymakers. So, we represent about 175 companies that are interested in blockchain technology, from your crypto native startups to your big institutional players like your big banks and your payment processors. And we have a very simple mission. We are advocating for clear rules of the road in Washington as it applies to this tech. And so I'm a lead of all our policy stuff. I lead our engagement in Capitol Hill and with the agencies. And as you mentioned, it's been a busy week. I feel like every week in crypto feels like a decade. Um, and
Sometimes,
we're all
yeah.
just kind of rolling with it at this point.
Yeah, I don't know who said this, but there's this like um quote about like some decades are lived in years and some years are decades or something like that, and it's like dog year version of that in crypto. So yes, so we are sort of like allies with the Digital Chamber in that we are also a nonprofit organization that provides education and advocacy for, we're just it's focused on the infrastructure kind of aspect of the crypto sector as a whole, whereas you guys are just much bigger. I remember when Perry Ann started the organization, and I think it was 2014. It was so early on. Yeah. And it's been amazing to see all of the work that you guys do. I think it's been really important to just like kind of keep moving the ball down the field in the way that you have been. So, when you're getting this conversation started with somebody who's new to crypto, what is your sort of like high level overview that you would say to somebody who's kind of more mainstream, not already in the crypto sector?
And that's most of the audience that I'm dealing with. We're talking about, lawmakers that have not heard of crypto except maybe a headline or a market failure, or they've got a young staffer, or they've one of their kids are like, Bitcoin. I love Bitcoin. I love NFTs. And so I'm usually dealing with that audience of folks who have not heard of this technology. And so the way I have approached it is I always try to start with, okay, what are some problems that you think exist in the traditional financial system? And I usually focus on finance, and as their interests grow, I start to build out from there. And they'll talk about, payments or settlement or inflation. And I say, okay, that is my opening salvo to talk about how blockchain technology and digital assets can be a solution. And I have found that when I talk about it in terms of problem and solution, it makes a lot more sense to those lawmakers and those regulators who have not heard of this tech. When I go in there, and I think it's been an issue with the crypto industry generally, as we're trying to educate in the policy side, when we talk about the tech and we try to explain the tech first, I watch as people's eyes glaze over. I watch as it goes right over their head. We lose them really quickly. So I try to talk about problem and then solution. We can get into the tech, and eventually we will get into the tech when it comes to Washington. But for me, I have found that the tech gets very confusing very quickly, and then you lose interest. And the thing I always tell my staff as we're going up and we're going to Capitol Hill, um, a lot of these members don't understand how the internet works. We could go up there if we were an internet, lobbying association. We can go up there and try to teach them how the internet works, but they understand the problems that the internet solves for them, how they use the internet, how they interact with the internet. And so I'm trying to bring that to the Web3 space.
That makes a lot of sense. Isn't it such a strange experience to be interacting with people, about these topics for the first time and simultaneously like be so deep into the world of crypto like you are as a person and the news and the details? It's just like living in two completely different worlds. So, one of the things that we found when we talk about it with folks is that because it's financial, it's like more scary, especially as a place to sort of try to begin that conversation and have them understand, like you're talking about, those problems and solutions, because there's problems and solutions that the technology offers to non-financial applications as well, and sometimes those are like a little bit more approachable. What has your experience been in having to overcome the financial regulatory aspect of it?
It's tough. I mean, I couldn't agree more that the financial just tie to things is inherently scary for people, because when you're talking about people's money and you're talking about risk when it comes to people's money and wealth, it can be scary. There was a shift, I think, in our education mission, and I would say in the industry's education mission broadly post FTX. I think before the FTX market failure and some of the market failures of 2022 with Celsius and Voyager, everyone was focused on the financial aspect almost exclusively. We were talking about currency. We were talking about stores of value, meaning exchanges. We're talking about payments and settlement. After those market failures, I realized that there was such a conflation in Washington that everything was crypto. And when I say everything was crypto, it was blockchain technology equals crypto,
Mhm.
NFTs equal crypto.
Mhm.
Everything is financial in nature. And I realized because of that inherent fear that you alluded to, it made things really hard in trying to break down walls and get people to really focus on this and to educate themselves. And so I think after FTX, we did an introspective look in how we were messaging the technology and the benefits of this technology. And we started focusing on applications and use cases outside of the financial services sector. We started talking about how blockchain can be used for entertainment, how it could be used for supply chain provenance, how it could be used for healthcare. We were working on a bill and are still working on a bill on how can the Department of Veteran Affairs use blockchain to help veterans get their benefits, to
That'd
help
be
for
amazing.
record keeping for veterans. So focusing on those other use cases I have found has made it a lot easier. The financial side will always be our bread and butter because right now it is the largest part of the crypto ecosystem. When people think of crypto and they think of blockchain and they think of digital assets broadly, they still think of token goes up, I want to invest, tokens going down, volatility, I want to trade, it's speculative. That'll always be part of it, and but helping explain and educate on the other use cases and applications, I think makes it easier for people to understand and how the different parts of the technology work together. And so it's made it a lot easier for us to get into doors, to start to communicate some of the problems and the solutions that technology can provide. And that allows us to have an easier conversation when it comes to the financial services side of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd love to get an overview from you about so it's March 28th, 2024. Hopefully we'll release this soon, but just to give people that timestamp. You brought up FTX as this kind of defining marker. I agree that did just
There was
change.
some
I mean,
news about FTX
it was
today.
not just FTX, it was all of them like you talked about, but just that kind of shakeup that happened. But yeah, exactly. SBF,
Yeah.
Sam Bankman-Fried got, his 25-year sentence this morning. And yeah, interesting full circle kind of thing there, because I do think that one of the interesting things that happens is that just like time passes, and during that time passing the story can shift, and in that shift we have gotten to start talking about the other problems with the web. because they are also kind of more and more apparent in the same way that the financial problems with the web and how it was kind of like web 2 was just like kind of like ported to the analog world. There hasn't ever been a native digital currency. That problem kind of became more and more apparent, and then there was space for that story in the cultural zeitgeist, and now we're headed toward this other one about issues of freedom of speech and freedom of association online, and free markets and all of that kind of stuff. So, yeah, if you could just give us, from your opinion, an overview of the regulatory landscape
Yeah.
today, that would be awesome.
We're in a much better place now than we've been for a long time. The FTX thing, hopefully, it's behind us as of today, but it really impacted the regulatory landscape. Crypto, digital assets, Web3, I'm now conflating them. But when I talk about the ecosystem, we were making progress in terms of education across the various regulatory agencies, across the U.S. Legislative landscape. That education has always been towards the eye of advocacy. How can we help educate you so then we can shape the laws to make sure that we can create a legal framework for this new industry without stifling innovation? And how can we keep it here in the U.S.?
We share those
FTX,
values. Those are like kind of like the bottom line values of like,
that's
we
the
either
bottom.
get this right or we don't, and there's a lot at stake.
Exactly. That's the bottom line mission. And so after the FTX market failure, because FTX and SBF were so intertwined in DC, and they were truly doing some of the grassroots lobbying and education for this technology,
I always forget that.
it soured a lot of folks. It
Mhm.
soured a lot of folks on the tech, which is unfortunate because one person's misgivings, and it had nothing to do with the tech itself. It was, classic old school fraud and embezzlement. And we could probably do another podcast on that. But it made it a lot more difficult because so much in Washington, and this goes to an earlier point I made, so much in Washington, policy is dictated by reactions, it's dictated by headlines, it's dictated by the market. And so when you have the market tanking as it was for all of 2023, when you have the headlines being overwhelmingly negative as it relates to digital assets, I think that's safe to say.
Mhm.
That led to a lot of reactionary policies and perceptions as it related to the entire industry. It was okay, there was this one guy, I saw him, I met with him, now he's a scam artist. That means the whole industry is a scam. That means all of the tech is a scam. Why are we doing this? So those doors that were open before had then been closed. I say all that now to provide context because that has changed. That has thawed finally. And so where we are in terms of, the US regulatory landscape as it applies to this technology, I think we're in a really good place. Now, I think when I say that, I often at times have to step back, and that my perception of a really good place is obviously very different than maybe many of the listeners who are saying, well, that's great. Does that mean we have new laws? Does that mean the SEC is now open to crypto? No, but we're building champions every single day. And I think if you look at some of the legislation that has been proposed and how far it has gone already in the legislative process, that it's moving through various committees, that it's becoming ripe for votes on the House and the Senate floor, that you not just have one, two, three members of Congress who are raising their hand saying, hey, I'm willing to stick my neck out for this industry because I support the technology. Or even if I don't support the technology, I believe there should be clear rules because my consumers and my constituents are using it. I'm amazed at that. It used to be a group of three or four, and now we're up
Mhm.
to 15, 20, 25, 30 folks who are saying this technology is here to stay.
That's
We had
wonderful.
to
That's
go
huge.
through, yeah, we had to go through
Yeah.
this battle of existence and like the
Mhm.
right to survive. And there's still efforts to say, hey, this is a fad and we should ban it, but those are pretty few and far between now. And now it's almost that there's been this pervasive understanding it's here to stay and we're going to regulate it. Now the battle's become how do we regulate it and how do we make
Mhm.
sure it doesn't stifle innovation? But that's a good place to be. Getting over that initial hurdle of like, is this like, does the US even need to be involved here? Do we need to do anything? That was tough. And that was the last year and a half plus. now we're in a better place. So I think the state of the U.S. regulatory perspective of the for digital assets for the Web3 economy, we're in a really good spot.
Yeah, I agree with that. That there is a certain amount of um that the uncertainty place is like in some ways more dangerous than at least getting to the time of having certainty, because it harms the market in these sort of invisible ways that we don't even know that we're missing, but we also do know that we're missing because things aren't being built as quickly as some of them, should have been built, that kind of thing. What kind of legislation or regulation are you excited about? Like, what's the kind of like threats and opportunities?
Opportunities. I think a lot of people have heard of two bills in particular. One is a stablecoin bill. And so that is creating a regulatory framework for stablecoins and stablecoin issuers. I'm excited about that one. It has moved through committee. I think it, if anything, has a chance to move the rest of the year. It could be that one, but there's still a lot of negotiating that needs to happen. The other one is a market structure bill. And I think this is both the best opportunity and the biggest threat,
Mhm.
trying to solve the age old question of what is a digital asset security and goes under the SEC's jurisdiction, what is a commodity that goes under the CFTC's jurisdiction. This has plagued the industry for over a decade. It continues to plague the industry as we all read, it seems like a new headline each week of a new enforcement action from the SEC, who's trying to be very territorial and saying, this whole industry is mine. You've got the CFTC, who's not as loud, but saying, well, wait a second, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and maybe more are mine, and that's like 75% of the market cap. There's a regulatory turf war going on, and Congress has the ability to solve that turf war and to draw clear jurisdictional lines. And so there's one bill out there right now. It's called the Fit for the 21st Century Act. It is sponsored by Patrick McHenry in House Financial Services, GT Thompson in House Ag. And this is a bill that it's not perfect, but it's moving, and it'll create those jurisdictional lines for us that I think will provide the much, much needed clarity for issuers, for platforms, for consumers. So I'm very excited about those. The other angle is illicit finance, which is top of mind in the Senate. There are some bills out there, one sponsored by Senator Elizabeth Warren, that I would say is a direct threat. That, as we talked about earlier, it's really hard to draw when you're talking about regulation to draw a line between protecting consumers and investors and stifling innovation. You have to find that sweet spot where innovation can continue to grow and flourish and consumers and investors can be protected. This bill from Elizabeth Warren and some of the other illicit finance bills in the Senate, I think, lead towards more stifling innovation, where it makes it impossible for some of these startups in our space to exist in the US. So trying to find a solution to address illicit finance is top of mind, both threat and opportunity. So those are just a few. I'm really excited. I think people, when they think about crypto and they think about Congress, they're like, yeah, there's these one or two bills I've heard of. There was 80 bills introduced last Congress, and we are looking towards over 100 to be introduced this Congress that aren't as sexy as some of those big other bills. They're not, the 75-page bills that try to solve all the world's problems. They're bills that don't make the headlines, that are 1 to 2 pages. Those can move the needle and those can make a difference, and they're easier to pass. So there's a lot of things that are under the surface that a lot of us aren't paying attention to outside of DC. Um, and that's just to say a ton of work is going on. And so I'm excited about where we are again. And I think we'll get legislation, if not this year, definitely next year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for that outline. That was really great. We were saying how it was a big news week this week, before we started rolling. And the other bit of news, two things on the same morning, or no, I guess the SEC ruling came in the other day. I just read something like kind of detailed about the breakdown about it this morning. But so basically, in the SEC's lawsuit against Coinbase, which is obviously one for all of us to watch because Coinbase is, the biggest company in our sector by far, probably. Um, they are proceeding with the case, except for this issue about Coinbase Wallet,
Yeah.
and so that is an interesting distinction. There've been lots of commentary about the judge's thoughts on why the decisions were made that were made, and what that might indicate. Do you have thoughts that you want to share with us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's easy to look at the ruling and again look at the headlines and be like, "Oh no, the judge ruled in favor of the SEC." Oh no, like Coinbase, who, to your point, is the biggest name in our business. Like if anyone can fight back against government
Right.
overreach, it could be Coinbase.
Yeah.
And they're doing that, and I still think they're doing
And
it.
thank goodness to them for that. Like,
Oh, of course.
almost nobody else would have the resources to sustain. And so, you know,
Totally, which is part of the problem with
yeah.
the SEC because we hear about the Coinbase case, but there's 100 other cases where they're going after the little guy who can't fight back.
Yeah.
So when I looked at I looked at the opinion from the judge. Some things were surprising, some things were not. When you step back and say, okay, this was a motion to dismiss. This is a very hard bar to meet to get this accepted. I wasn't
Mm,
surprised. I think this case was always going to go through the full legal process, was going to go through discovery, so both sides can make the full argument into why they are right. I think the judge owes it to the community, it owes it to government to hear everyone out and to make sure that this can go through the process. So I'm not surprised. I wouldn't read too much into the opinion as like this is a win for SEC or this is a win for Coinbase. This is just an early decision before the larger case, and we'll continue to get facts out. We'll continue to learn more, and hopefully, we do have a resolution that we can say, okay, there's a winner and there's a loser here. It's just not yet, and that's okay. Um,
mhm.
so that's my only opinion on it.
That totally makes sense. I think it's just going to be really interesting to see where this goes. Um, but it takes us back full circle to the regulatory stuff because even this one case isn't really going to give all of the regulatory clarity that most projects would need to move forward.
Yeah, that's what sucks. It's what sucks when we have to rely on the courts.
Yeah,
Um, and the courts are great and they serve their purpose, but one judge, I mean, we saw this in the Ripple case. One judge can say one thing, another judge can say another thing
yeah.
on the same set of facts, and then we're still dealing with this confusion and lack of clarity. And so, really, the only one that can solve this mess is Congress. And so, I that's what we're trying to do every day, trying to get them to do that.
Well, so some of that work that you guys are doing is having a DC blockchain summit. It's coming up in May. I believe I saw that you will be moderating one of the panels about the intricacies of accounting for Bitcoin on your balance sheet. That'll be very interesting. It's one of those issues that's kind of like, oh, taxes, ugh, but so important to mainstream adoption because if there isn't a path for accounting when it comes to how you might handle it for your business, that's like just again another layer of risk that's like outside of the norm and thus causes a lot of problems and friction in the industry. So that's exciting. Do you like want to talk about the summit a little bit? Tell people why they should
Yeah,
come.
no, thank you. I'm so stoked for the summit, May 15th in Washington D.C. I truly think this is the greatest opportunity to see industry and policy makers together in one room and to hear all perspectives. I think we go to a lot of crypto conferences and we hear the same message over and over again as it relates to policy, like, oh, the government needs to get its act together. A lot of what I've said on this call. Um, we want to make sure at the DC Blockchain Summit that you're getting every perspective. And so we have detractors from government going, we have supporters from government going, we have detractors from industry going, supporters from industry. We try to bring in every perspective and we try to cover all of the policy areas that are top of mind. Not everything's going to be Capitol Hill, SEC, CFTC. We talk about tax, accounting, national security, illicit finance. This year, this is the seventh DC Blockchain Summit. This year, we're going to have three stages. We've always only had one stage,
Wow.
but to our when we started the call, it's been a busy year, and it's every week we're saying it's been a busy week. There's just so much content out there, and so I'm thrilled with the lineup of speakers. We've got folks from Capitol Hill. I believe we have 10 members of Congress from both the House and Senate. We have the SEC.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, CFTC, IRS, Treasury, the Federal Reserve with Governor Bowman coming. We have a state panel with some state lawmakers. So if you're in DC, if you're not in DC, but you want to go and see truly the intersection of policy, digital assets, Web3, this is the event for you. And I will be there. I will be moderating. And I hope I can say hi to everyone who will be attending that day.
Awesome. Well, we are going to wrap up here shortly, but where can people find you?
So you can see our website where you'll see my shining face on there, www.digitalchamber.org, not .com, .org. You can also find me on Twitter at Cody Carbone DC, as well as LinkedIn at Cody Carbone. Feel free to reach out. Always happy to engage in the DMs.
Awesome. So our final question is the name of our podcast. What kind of internet do you want?
I want an internet that is driven by free market values, that allows for constant innovation. I think we should be innovating continuously every single day, and an internet that isn't, gate kept, that isn't stonewalled, that isn't stuck in its ways, and allows for new awesome features every single day.
That sounds great. Let's get that.
Yeah, let's get that.
Thanks so much. And
Thanks
everyone out there. We'll see you next time.